The current crisis in Canadian housing has been building up for years, and we're now at the point where we need to build millions of homes in order for supply to meet demand. But currently, we're not on track to get there for decades. In fact, according to recent numbers released by the Parliamentary Budget Office, between now and 2035, we need to build about 3.2 million new housing units. And in that same report, they say we're only projected to build 2.5 million, leaving us a huge gap of almost 700,000 units. At the same time, CMHC is estimating that in order for housing supply to meet housing demand between now and 2035, we're going to need to almost double the amount of housing starts that we're doing each year. These are just some of the reasons why the current federal government under Mark Carney is proposing a new program which is eventually going to become its own department, for better or for worse, called Build Canada Homes. We recently got some new information about what this department is going to look like a few days ago, so I thought it would be worth taking some time to quickly go through what Build Canada Homes is and what it could turn into, and also some of the issues it's going to have to contend with in order to meet its goal of filling that housing shortfall. On a very basic level, Build Canada Homes is a new government project that is eventually going to become its own government department. It was initially funded with $13 billion, or I should say it's going to be funded with $13 billion. And its goal is very simple. It is to make more affordable housing for Canadians who can't currently get into the market. It's going to do this by building affordable homes at scale. Everything from supportive transitional housing for lower income Canadians, as well as more affordable units for middle income families who are currently locked out of the market due to the higher prices. Now, there are a lot of reasons to be skeptical here. I'm always a little bit suspicious when I see the government looking to solve a big problem by creating more bureaucracy. In my experience, that just generally doesn't help. It creates more issues. One of the biggest reasons for hope here is that these projects are largely going to be built on land that's already owned by the government. And one of the biggest costs associated with building is the land acquisition cost. And that's going to be eliminated in these cases. Now, they're not only going to be in the business of building new housing stock, although they have proposed a few projects in Ottawa, Toronto, Edmonton, and a few other places. There's also money earmarked for transitional housing projects for lower income or homeless Canadians, as well as money set aside to keep current affordable housing stock available and not to be converted into higher end, less accessible housing. Now, what's supposed to make this agency stand out is speed and innovation. They're talking a really good game about a whole bunch of new technologies and building techniques such as modular homes, mass timber construction, and factory-built components that are moved to the site later on. Now, these are methods with a higher upfront cost, but that can reduce building costs down the road. And they're also, unsurprisingly, supposed to focus on cutting the emissions associated with the building process as well. And the idea, for better or worse, is to make affordable housing more like infrastructure, something that the government invests in heavily to hopefully allow them to build it as needed at scale quickly. The potential benefits of a program like this are self-explanatory and pretty significant. It could take a little bit of the pressure off of rising home prices and high rental costs by adding tens of thousands of units to the current housing stock. It could also have the added benefit of providing more of the types of housing that we actually need rather than the types that developers just think are the most profitable. Things like supportive housing for people who need it and people who are struggling with homelessness, and also add to the stock of much-needed entry-level housing units for middle-class families. And because it can leverage public land, it does actually have the opportunity to do this at a cost that's much lower than what a builder would pay for it. But this is assuming that the government can do something like build houses as efficiently as a private developer, and this is where we're going to get into some of the criticisms of this program. Now, I could go on for a while as to why I think this may be a money pit that Canadians as taxpayers are going to dump a bunch of our tax dollars into, but I'm going to focus on three key things. And to be clear, I really hope I'm wrong about this, but after hearing so many promises in the past from organizations like CMHC about keeping housing affordable, I don't think you can blame people for being a little bit skeptical. The first issue that I see that I think is going to be a major barrier is zoning and approvals. Even with federal land, they do need a sign-off from the municipal government. This means everything from rezoning to public consultations to dealing with NIMBYism, paying for permits, and all that sort of thing. As well as being costly, these processes are time-consuming. And the lack of housing stock in Canada is an urgent problem, and one of the big selling points of this organization is supposed to be the ability to build this housing stock quickly. The second key reason for skepticism is government bureaucracy. Federal projects come with many layers of internal review that can further slow down the process. I also have some real concerns around transparency because the government is going to be acting as the developer the financer, and the regulator. I'm certain there's going to be tons of new employees hired to man this division. And just from what I see of governments, particularly liberal governments, but it's all parties, it's not just the liberals. These sorts of places tend to have way more staff than they actually need, staff that are well paid and get pensions. And while it's great that it's creating jobs for people in Ottawa, stable jobs, which we also need more of, it's important that this money we're spending on increasing the housing stock actually goes towards increasing the housing stock. The other thing to keep in mind is the cost of materials and the cost of construction, which have certainly gone down since the highs during COVID, but they're still pretty elevated, especially with all the tariff stuff going on. And governments use the same contractors and trades and materials as private developers do. They're not going to pay a discount. In fact, they're probably going to end up paying more somehow. I don't know how, but they probably will. You can sense my bias a little bit here. And while things like modular construction and these other techniques that they're talking about can cut down on the cost, there is going to be a significant upfront investment, and it's not a magic bullet. You're still going to have to pay the elevated cost for these materials and the people to put these materials together. I absolutely hope I'm wrong about this, but I have a feeling this could just end up being another one of those organizations where there's lots of big promises and it gets all tied up in regulatory issues, zoning issues, all the stuff that is tying up private developers in a lot of the same ways. The one thing I think I'm actually optimistic about is that Build Canada Homes is supposedly going to be focused on building affordable housing. Whereas developers, well, they do want to build affordable housing to some degree, they're more focused on building things that they can build as cheaply as possible and sell for a profit. Without that same profit incentive and more of a focus on solving the actual problems that we as a society have, I'm hoping we'll get some more housing stock that's actually needed, but we'll see whether or not that's going to be the case. So in a nutshell, Build Canada Homes is something we're about to spend $13 billion on. There's nothing that's really going to stop that now. If it works, it could be a real game changer, adding tens of thousands of units to the current housing stock, which could help stabilize rental rates and housing prices. If it gets bogged down like past initiatives, it could just become another announcement and a big spending bill, which I feel like we're getting numb to at this point since COVID. But this crazy amount of money we're spending does have real repercussions on the economy. For myself, I'll be keeping a very close eye on how the first projects that they've proposed, which is about 4,000 units, are built, how quickly they're built, how effectively they're built, and how they look once they're done, if they're places where people actually want to live. If the cost per unit ends up being much cheaper than something built by a private developer, and they're the kind of places where people want to live, then my level of optimism will go up, and I genuinely hope that is what happens because we desperately need more affordable housing stock, both on the buy side and on the rent side. Let me know in the comments how you're feeling about this announcement. Do you feel like it's something that could actually be a game changer? Or are you expecting it to just be another thing that we look back on in 10 years and be like, well, we spent a bunch of money and didn't really get a whole lot for it? Thanks again for taking the time to watch. Please like and subscribe if you found some value here, and have a fantastic rest of your day. Take care.